As Democrats fight to release the Epstein Files, Republicans in Congress now are blocking their efforts. It begs the question, what is Donald Trump hiding? Well, Congressman Dan Goldman is here to discuss. Welcome back to Defending Democracy. I'm Mark Elias. Let's get started. Congressman Dan Goldman, welcome back to Defending Democracy.
Thanks so much, Mark, for having me.
All right, a lot has happened since you and I last chatted. So I want to start with the bill that Congress passed that Republicans jammed through, seemingly a combination of in the middle of the night and with as little as attention as I've ever seen the controlling party in power in Congress want to give to a landmark piece of their legislation. They seem quite ashamed of it from the beginning, and that is the big ugly bill. And what do you think about that bill is going to mean for the American people in very concrete terms? Why do you think Republicans in the House went along with it, even though it seems like it targets their voters?
I think it is going to result in the vast majority of Americans suffering from higher costs, less and worse healthcare, food insecurity, student loan limitations and limitations on accessing education. It's going to result in higher energy prices. It's going to result in constraint on the U.S. economy, fewer jobs, and ultimately also billionaires can pay less in their taxes. And it's a really bad bill for 99.99% of the United States. And it is a real a real spectacle as to what exactly Republicans are thinking. In the end, the fact that it was so big is ultimately what saved it, because the theory, I think, from the Republicans is that everybody has something that they can tout to their constituency that they got in this bill. A lot of what they are saying about the bill is just blatantly and patently false, but that assuming and putting aside their lies and misleading statements about the bill, they think that it both follows some bogus mandate that Donald Trump doesn't have, and that it is the hallmark of what he ran on. And since they are nothing if not shills for Donald Trump and have completely turned over all of their own power, independence, thinking to him, they have gone along with what he wants, and this is what he wants.
All right, so I wanted to start with that because it seems to me that there are now two other sort of big topics in the news that, in my mind, connect up. Okay, one is the Jeffrey Epstein files, and the willingness of, again, the Republicans to seem to be willing to reverse course on, what they have said, surrender to Donald Trump's, position on these files. And the second is the absolutely heinous use of masked ICE agents who are, going into communities and engaging in tactics that seem to be deeply unpopular. And so to me, I sort of see all three of these as connected, because it is, as you say, the willingness of the Republicans to surrender their power. So I'll do dealer's choice here. Should we start with Epstein or should we start with ICE?
Well, both are interesting in and of themselves. I certainly agree with you on the Epstein front that there has been nothing that MAGA world has been more obsessed with than the Epstein Files. And in May, I wrote a letter to Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, that kind of went through all of the various things she had said, all of the promises that she and the president had made about how important it is to release the Epstein files, how when she released the first batch, it was mostly public records and there was an outcry, and she said she wanted a report on what happened in 24 hours and she wanted everything done in 2 weeks and ready to go. And then they pulled dozens of FBI agents off of their regular duties of, investigating things like terrorism and massive gangs and violence and fraud and corruption, so that they can go through the Epstein files to redact for things that should not be disclosed, such as minor children's information. And then all of a sudden it went dark. There was nothing and crickets from the DOJ. So I wrote a letter saying, what's going on? We know there are lots of connections and contacts between Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein. We know that you have combed through these files in great depth, probably more depth than had been done before. And now all of a sudden, we don't hear anything. Well, when the memo came out last week, well, first Elon Musk tweet. Let's not forget.
Right. Let's not forget that. Yeah.
Yeah. When in the breakup between Musk and Trump, in a fit of rage, Musk drops the big bomb, he called it, which is that Trump is in the Epstein files, which is why they're not releasing them. And then last week there's a memo basically covering up the whole thing, sort of undermining all of the conspiracy theories that were trumpeted by Kash Patel and Dan Bongino, the director and deputy director of the FBI. And now they say, no, all those conspiracy theories are false and there's nothing to see here. We're not going to release them. And it's now even past the point, it seems, of speculation. It is so clear it's a cover-up. It is so clear that the only rational explanation as to what's going on is that Pam Bondi, operating at the behest of Donald Trump, as she does every hour of every day, just said, we're not going to release these because it will be bad politically for Donald Trump. And what is interesting about this is the Republicans in Congress, as you point out, Mark, are going along with whatever Trump wants.
Right.
And there were Anna Paulina Luna and other MAGA Republicans were screaming from the rooftops for these files, and now they're silent. And today they had a chance to vote to release the files, and the Republicans voted against it. And it is, once again, the Republicans falling in line. But the interesting thing here is that MAGA world is not falling in line. And so the outside folks in MAGA world who've been spun up on these conspiracy theories, who believe that, there's all sorts of materials that are nefarious and dangerous, and there are different, I think, interpretations of what that is within the Epstein files. But they're not satisfied that the cover up, to the point where Donald Trump has to basically release a Truth Social post begging them to move on. I mean, that was the most pathetic post I've seen Donald Trump write, which is like, please just move on. Stop focusing on this. I beg you. And then, making stuff up about the Democrats. I don't even know what he's talking about. And so now we have today Mike Johnson, the speaker, saying, yeah, we should have transparency. Pam Bondi should release them. And so it's a real fracture of this alliance. I don't think I would call it an alliance, of this complete acquiescence of House Republicans to Donald Trump. And it remains to be seen what will happen.
So I have so many questions about this. So the first one I want to ask you is, putting on your former prosecutor hat. What I've said, but tell me if this is not right, is I don't have any idea if there's a client list or not a client list. Like, I don't know that, but there definitely are files. Like, there were federal prosecutors who investigated this case. There is presumably grand jury material. There are FBI 302s. Like, there are materials in a file, because they not only indicted him, they obviously indicted, I forget the woman's name.
Elaine Maxwell, yeah.
Yeah. And so there's obviously material that has not been released. So the notion that there is nothing to release strikes me as implausible. Does that seem right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, 100%. And this idea that all of the materials, all that's in there is, videos and photos and identification information of minors and victims, and that therefore that can't be released, and so nothing should be released, is preposterous. When, if as a prosecutor, if you are interviewing a victim, you are going very carefully, incident by incident, time by time, visit by visit, and you're asking them, okay, who else was there? Who was with you? Who was on the island with you, in addition to Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell? Did you have sex with any of these other people? I mean, you would get into all of that stuff, and there would be names in there. I don't know whether the Epstein himself kept a client list. That's beside the point. The point is that there are other people's names, almost certainly, implicated in some fashion in the conduct. It doesn't mean they're guilty of a crime, but that they were at least tangentially or more involved in Epstein's scheme.
Yeah. And the second thing I want to ask you about is you said that in his social media post, he talks about various Democrats, and you don't know what that's about. So I think I do know what it's about, and I want to roll this out to you and see what you think. So what he says in that social media post, which I think is actually the most newsworthy thing in that post, is he essentially confirms the existence of the files, because he doesn't say there are no files. He says they are essentially forgeries, right? He says the files were written by Obama and Clinton, and I think he mentions John Brennan, maybe James Comey, and others in the Biden administration. Like, he is actually laying the groundwork for there to be files. And he's been asked some questions by reporters since then that also in which he has given this essentially same answer. He's asked, I think by a reporter whether Pam Bondi said whether his name is in the files. And his answer is essentially, those were created by Comey and other people in the Biden administration who, are responsible for the Russia thing. Like, in other words, he has kind of advanced this ball because I think he figures, like, the files may come out.
Oh, yeah.
There are people who know, he's fired so many damn people from the Department of Justice. Pam Bondi's fired, maybe there'd be leaks, who knows? But I do think there is a concerted effort on his part to pre-butt if and when they come out, and he or people close to him or his friends, who the hell knows, are listed in whatever way, that he can say, you know what, this is just, fake news.
Great point, Mark. Very, very astute. Must be why they pay you the bigger bucks than me. But you're absolutely right. And this is Trump's MO. We've seen him do this in so many different things where he doesn't actually address the facts or the substance of any of the allegations. And he goes after the messenger or the vehicle, right? That's why he goes after the media. That's why he goes after law firms so they can't file lawsuits against him. That's why he goes after the judges. He doesn't actually fight the facts. He just tries to discredit them so that everybody thinks it's, quote, fake news or whatever it is when it actually does come out. And I don't doubt for a second that that's what he's thinking. And I think he is correct to assume that they will come out. And it does further confirm that his name is in there in some capacity. And the question now will be, how much do these sycophantic Republicans in Congress jump on his complete bullshit explanation that this was somehow fabricated by the Biden administration? And remember, most of this, he was indicted during the Trump administration.
Right.
So
Right.
now he's, I guess, saying that they were fabricated during the Obama administration, that somehow Obama, before Donald Trump was ever a candidate, had it out for him, and forget about Obama because I'm sure he was not involved in any of the investigations, but the line prosecutor, I mean, it's all such bogus. And he was indicted during the Trump administration. So it's, I think, in fact, the Southern District of New York probably had the case the entire time they had the case and the files was probably within the Trump administration, or at least the vast majority of it.
Okay, the other question that I have about this for you is, so if you have the Republicans in one way blocking the release, as I understand they did, I don't know if it was a committee vote or a full vote, whatever, but you have House Republicans blocking the release. You have the Speaker saying they should be released. You have other House Republicans saying they should be released. I assume Democrats would probably all vote or nearly all vote for them to be released. Like, what happens? Did anyone say, "Hey, Speaker Johnson, it's really interesting. You think they should be released? It turns out you're the Speaker of the House, so you could actually do something about this." What do they just play a game of like four-corner basketball here, or like pointing fingers at one another? Like, how does this play out?
So it reminds me, and I think you'll remember this, of all the times that Donald Trump said that he's happy to talk to Special Counsel Mueller. He'd be happy to go in and talk to him and go in front of the grand jury and say whatever it is. He would love to, but it sort of depends on his lawyers. Meanwhile, when the report comes out, we see such extensive obstruction and efforts to avoid him testifying and arguments against it. And all of what was going on behind the scenes was exactly the opposite of what Trump was saying publicly. And I have a feeling that's a little bit of what we have right now, which is Mike Johnson is trying to placate the MAGA right world online and elsewhere by saying that they should come out and putting this on Bondi. But even though there's a resolution that we introduced yesterday to urge the release of it, and there was a vote today that would have required the release of the Epstein Files in conjunction with another bill that we were considering, and they all voted it down. And this is true, though, Mark, on so many different things. And it's, I talk about it a lot as it relates to anti-Semitism because Republicans pay a lot of lip service to being against anti-Semitism and all this. And when push comes to shove and there are actual actions that Congress can take to address the root cause of anti-Semitism, the Republicans vote against it. They do not support it. And so this is just yet another, I think, iteration, a spin on that wheel where they're lying to the public and hoping they'll get away with it because most people are not paying attention to, what happens in a committee or a resolution in Congress, et cetera.
Okay, so I want to turn to the immigration issue, and tell you my thesis for why it connects to this. Because in a normal Congress, the Speaker of the House would be absolutely enraged and would be demanding the White House explain why members of Congress who have an absolute right to access immigrant detention centers, like this is like in the law, like this is not like some right by custom or by practice. This is in the law that members of Congress have this right. And the Trump administration is denying, as I understand it, members of Congress from exercising this power that they are entitled to by statute. And Mike Johnson seems to be, again, like, where is he? Like, where are the House Republicans being like, this is our prerogative. This is our power. We are Congress who passed this law that says you have to allow for this. And so that's why I tie these together, because It seems to me it is part of the same cause or the same problem. But can you explain to people exactly what it is that Congress has the right to do, what they are being denied of, and how this fits into this picture?
Well, first, I'll just say you are correct. And it is yet another example of the Republican majority actively and overtly and affirmatively trying to undermine their own authority as a separate independent body. basically just give Donald Trump and the administration all of Congress's authority and whatever it might be. The law says, now there's constitutional oversight, right, requirements, which and under Article 1 as Congress, we are a separate and equal branch, and we must conduct oversight to ensure that the laws are faithfully executed.
And the court, and so everyone out there knows the courts, including the Supreme Court, have said that that is part of the role of Congress.
And our congressional subpoena power actually derives from that constitutional authority.
Yep.
So that gives us a broad right to conduct oversight. In this particular case, in the appropriations bills that were most recently passed last year, there is a clause that says specifically that members of Congress, individual members of Congress, have the right to observe and conduct oversight over any Department of Homeland Security facility that is used to detain or otherwise house illegal immigrants. All right? So I represent Lower Manhattan and Brooklyn, and there's a large federal building in my district, 26 Federal Plaza, that has immigration courtrooms and an immigration holding facility, an ICE holding facility, that is not designed to be a place where anyone stays overnight. We, of course, because of these masked agents in plain clothes with no identification, are snatching immigrants out of courtrooms where they're going for routine check-ins for their immigration cases, often including asylum applications. And let's remember, asylum is a lawful pathway to come into this country. And then they're being detained because Stephen Miller and Donald Trump want to jack up the number of deportations. And the easiest targets are the ones that are going to court at a particular time. So you don't have to go out into the community and look for somebody. You know where they're going to be at what time. So we're just going to make this really easy. We're going to go after the people doing it the right way.
It's kind of perverse, right? Because then they're going after actually the people who are showing up for their court hearings.
They're going after people trying to do things the lawful way, the right way, rather than going after the convicted criminals, the worst of the worst that they promised they would do. This is not at all what they said they would do. But it also, just in terms of the perverse incentives, if you're someone who's doing it the right way and you get wind that if you do it the right way, you will be detained and deported, what are you going to do? Well, you're no longer going to do it the right way. And so that's going to push more people underground. It's going to make our communities much less safe, and certainly people who have work visas are not going to be working on the books. It goes on and on. But this facility in 26 Federal Plaza is now being used for immigrants who are detained to stay there, not just overnight, but for many, many, many nights. I sent an email to ICE asking to come to that facility and observe it and conduct oversight, as I am statutorily authorized to do. They wrote back to me, "You are not authorized to go into this facility because it's not a detention facility." I went the next day and I met with the deputy director of that office. And I asked him specifically, I said, well, you say this is not a detention facility, but are people sleeping there? Yes. Are they staying there for multiple days? Yes. Are they being fed?
Are they free to leave?
Yeah. Are they free to leave? Right. Are they fed? Well, we do feed them, although we've gotten a lot of reports that they are fed very little. And I said, so how is this not, and I read the statute, a facility being used to otherwise house illegal immigrants? And, this was a guy who got an order from above. I don't blame him, but it is such a bastardization and illegal and obviously illegal or unlawful interpretation of the law to say that because it's not technically called a detention facility, that it therefore is outside of the law. And that's why they have been preventing members of Congress from going in and observing the conduct. And the reason we want to observe it is that I am getting report after report after report of horrific conditions. 100 people in large rooms with no beds, with no showers, with no change of clothes, with very little food, very little, if any, medical care. These are unacceptable conditions. And the reason they don't want to let us in is because they don't want us to see these conditions. And so they're coming up with bogus reasons, and it's really inexcusable. And it is a blatant violation of the law.
And as far as I can tell, rather than standing up for members of Congress's rights, the Speaker and the House leadership is essentially siding with Donald Trump.
100%. They are completely silent. And I'm on the Homeland Security Committee, and I went into a committee hearing a couple of weeks ago, and I moved to subpoena Secretary Noem to come before the committee to answer questions as to why and under what basis she is implementing this policy of preventing us from conducting oversight. And of course, none of the Republicans had any interest in bringing her in. And that would be the committee where you would do it. So that was the opportunity for them to stand up for Congress's statutory right to conduct oversight, and they were silent.
I'll be right back with more of my conversation with the congressman in a moment. But, in 2020, I founded Democracy Docket to cover everything that is happening to democracy. And what we are seeing now with the Epstein Files, with masked ICE agents spreading out around the country, it shows that there has never been a greater need than there is today. And the growing team at Democracy Docket is tracking what all of these anti-democratic efforts are up to, what the groups undermining free and fair elections are, what the people spreading disinformation are up to, all of it, along with Republican voter suppression tactics and more. But it needs your help. Support Democracy Docket's growing team's efforts by becoming a premium member now at the link above or in the description below. All right, I want to pivot just a quarter turn from here and explain to me, as someone who has never been a federal prosecutor, not worked in the federal government, what are the circumstances under which ICE agents need to be masked? Like, why is that?
Well, there are no circumstances when they should be masked.
Right.
And it's incredibly troubling for a number of reasons. First of all, they're law enforcement officers. They are part of the government. They assume some risk, whatever that may be, for doing this job. And there are lots of rules and laws to protect them and keep them safe. And what they are doing is ostensibly trying to keep us safe, allegedly. And so there's no reason that they should be masked. When you see masked agents with no identification, it brings you back to Soviet Union. And you start thinking of, Nazi Germany, and you start thinking of authoritarian regimes that use secret police to sweep up people who have not done anything wrong, but for political purposes. And it is designed to instill fear and terror and intimidation in these communities. It is also incredibly dangerous. And there are reports of other people, not law enforcement agents, putting masks on, dressing in plain clothes, going up to people and saying they're ICE officers and they need to come with them. And then, at least in one instance I'm aware of, a woman was almost raped by that person. And the notion that our government law enforcement would not identify themselves, which is something that they are supposed to do by their rules and regulations, and would hide their face. And their explanation doesn't pass the laugh test. I mean, they say, because they're being doxxed and assaults are up. Well, they have not identified, at least to my knowledge, any assaults that have anything to do with doxing or having agents tracked down at their home, or in any way individually identified the agents. Whatever incidents, and I'm very suspicious about what they call assaults to begin with. But the examples that the White House has put it forward are terrible, violent incidents against Homeland Security or Customs and Border Protection or ICE offices or ICE officers directly, but not because of them being unmasked. And so it's a complete bogus explanation that also is belied by the fact that about a third of the judges in the United States have received threats, and many have been doxxed, as well as their kids, because of attacks by Republicans against court orders. And they will not even provide more funding for these judges. They won't provide funding for the judges to scrub the internet of their addresses and personal identification information. So if they're so worried about doxing and federal officials, you'd think they would also be concerned about judges against whom that is actually happening. And there's real evidence of that, unlike these ICE agents.
Yeah, and look, I assume in your time as a federal prosecutor in Lower Manhattan, where there are, I mean, that office deals with everything from organized crime to violent gangs to drug conspiracies to terrorism. You know, you all have dealt with the challenges facing federal prosecutors, facing judges, facing law enforcement. And I don't remember last time I was in New York City seeing the New York Police Department, the FBI, the federal prosecutors going in and out of those buildings wearing full masks.
Never.
I mean,
Never. And I dealt specifically with ICE agents and worked very closely with them against really bad people and violent criminals. And when they went out to make arrests or to do take investigative steps, they did not wear masks. That is, so if you're able to be mask free when you're going after real violent criminals, why can't you be mask free when you are detaining nonviolent, non-criminal immigrants on a civil claim, not a criminal claim, and trying to deport them? It's beyond me, and that's why the only motivation it can be to instill this sort of dragnet, this terror state of fascism and government overreach and Big Brother, and it's disgusting, and it's un-American, and it has to stop.
In the few minutes I have left with you, I wanted to ask you a question that came out of a conversation I had with Preet Bharara, who, as you know, former U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, and he said something that,
boss.
he told me something that really took me by surprise, and not that I don't believe him or trust him, but I want your reaction to it. He told me that he would conduct the final interviews for assistant U.S. attorneys who are hired in the office. He told me that not only didn't politics ever come up, that it was like verboten to discuss, whether someone was a Democrat or a Republican or saw politics one way or the other. He pointed out that, and I think I raised it with him kind of as a joke, and he said, no, he actually hired Danielle Sassoon, who was the interim U.S. attorney appointed initially by Donald Trump, who I gather is probably a conservative. He hired Hagen Skoten, who was the other line assistant who resigned, who by his own postings on social media when he resigned over the Eric Adams, the order to dismiss the indictment, wrote a scathing letter. Both he and Sassoon did, but he seems to be a conservative, and I assume a Republican. But he also told me he hired Emil Bovee. And like setting aside what judgment it showed that he hired him, like what he described to me is not just rhetoric that U.S. attorneys' offices and Department of Justice do not get involved in partisan politics, but that it would be culturally completely unacceptable for it to be in the department. I'm just curious if that was your experience and how you compare that to what Pam Bondi seems to be doing and what Alina Habba in New Jersey seems to be doing and what, you see elsewhere. Like it jarred me to hear that like literally it never came up.
Todd Blanche is another one who was hired before Preet. He was a year before I was, and I was, worked closely with him and was friends with him. I actually spoke to him not too long ago, and we were joking how neither one of us really had any idea about the other's politics and where we were. People always accuse the FBI, of course, of being partisan. And by reputation, everyone, you often hear the number that maybe 2/3, 3/4 are Republican of the FBI. And I get asked, well, what's your experience? And I said, I have no idea. I don't know the political affiliation or the political views of the dozens and dozens of FBI agents who I worked with. It never came up. It never was a consideration. And frankly, it wasn't even a consideration in public corruption cases. Like, it just was not anything that we ever thought about or considered when we were charging cases. And to see what is happening now and what shamefully is happening, under the authority of, Pam Bondi, yes, but also Todd Blanche, who's a alum of the Southern District, and Emil Beauvais, who's telling his subordinates to disregard court orders, I don't know what word to use. It's incredibly distressing, and it's really deflating. I know what training those guys had, because I had the same training. And I never talked to them about politics. I had no idea what their political leanings were. That's just not what we would ever focus on. And I know that they were trained in the finest traditions of the SDNY and the Department of Justice, that you focus on the facts and the evidence without fear or favor. And what they are doing right now, and Emil Beauvais admitted it in that letter to Danielle Sassoon, is they are making decisions expressly separate from the facts and the evidence. He made the decision in the Eric Adams case by his own admission, not because based on the facts and the evidence and the law, but based on politics. And it is so anathema to the ethos of the Department of Justice, and it's so dangerous because if you think about it, if you allow politics to enter in, and you and I have talked about this too, some cases, you don't know which cases they're driven by politics and which cases are not. You don't know which cases are driven by the facts and the evidence and which cases are driven by, Donald Trump's immigration policy. And if you don't know which cases are, but you know some are, then it undermines all of them. And that is why the politicization of our law enforcement system and our Department of Justice and FBI, et cetera, is so dangerous. That is exactly the kind of conduct that American diplomats go around the world telling foreign countries that if they act in that way, that the US and the international democratic community will not help them. That is a requirement to get support and funding, is to not politicize and weaponize criminal prosecutions. And here, Donald Trump is doing it so overtly. And well, because you are one of the subjects of his ire and his focus purely because of the legal work that you have done against him.
Well, yeah, and maybe we'll end with this. If you look at the end of that same social media post that we started talking about, where he talks about how the Epstein Files don't worry, they were written by Obama and Clinton and the Biden administration, and we shouldn't be paying attention to any of this. He ends by saying what the Department of Justice should be investigating and is investigating. He seems to know a lot about what the FBI and the Department of Justice is investigating. And then he lists a bunch of Democratic, he lists the 2020 election, which I was involved in, the 2024 election, which I'm not sure what he wants investigated. He actually won that election. He lists Act Blue, which is a platform used by Democratic campaigns to raise money. I mean, it's completely unhinged, but it does lead you to believe that, his part of the way in which he hopes to change the subject is by weaponizing the Department of Justice. And Steve Bannon, the night on Saturday night, about an hour after that comes out, he takes to the stage at Turning Point USA and says, yeah, the Epstein files are serious. They should be looked at by the same special counsel, special prosecutor I understand is going to be appointed in the next week or so, that's going to look into all the Democrats. And so, it is concerning at some level, at both, as individuals, but also for democracy, that he seems to view the Department of Justice as a tool to settle his own scores, but also to divert attention from things that he doesn't want people to pay attention to.
And what's even more disheartening is that the Senate confirmed an attorney general, an FBI director, whose only qualification is that they would do Donald Trump's personal and political bidding. And that is exactly what they are doing. That is exactly how this regime atop the Department of Justice is operating. It is shamefully, just disgracefully politicized. And everything is. The pardons are politicized. The cases they're dismissing are politicized. The cases they're prosecuting, the targets of their investigations, the firing of the prosecutors who work there, every single thing is viewed purely through a political lens, which is the exact opposite of how I was trained in the Department of Justice and the exact opposite of how it should work.
Well, Congressman Dan Goldman, I have you on as frequently as I do, and you're very indulgent with your time, and I appreciate that, because you are one of the true heroes for democracy. Like, you are someone who is not just willing to do the right thing, but you're willing to speak out about it in a time when, frankly, we have too few people who are willing to take a step forward and speak out. So thank you for always joining me, but in particular, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Mark.
Thanks so much for tuning into this episode of Defending Democracy. Please make sure you're subscribed to Democracy Docket's newsletters to stay informed on the latest voting rights and democracy news.